Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. Well, let's take the clock back here to Friday, February 21st, and I'm showing you a map here of the lower 48 that's looking at total daily accumulated precipitation. And while we were still dealing with a very pesky low pressure system that was moving off of the coast, putting down the snow, which we're going to take a look at in a few minutes, the reason why I show you this map is because it's kind of unique. We looked back over the last 15 years, and in terms of a single day's total accumulated precipitation for the whole of the lower 48, this particular day may rank in the top 10 for driest. That's because outside of the system that was sneaking through North Carolina, the rest of the country was largely void of any large low pressure systems. But as that system did go through, it did put down some snow, and here's a quick snapshot of what it looked like. You can see it here in the Appalachian Mountains, kind of lining up on the Blue Ridge, and then as you come over here, this is the northern extent of the snow as it extended here toward the south and east. We did see some very interesting cloud streaks that showed up on this snow on Friday. But what I want to show you is this particular shot in animation, because that's Friday's snow cover. Here's what things look like on Saturday and on Sunday. So with the warm-up we got at the end of the weekend, the snow quickly melted, although it caused quite a bit of travel problems throughout the day on Friday. Okay, what I want to do is I want to show you another map I made. Now this map is only valid through February 19th because I wanted to see it before that snow came through. We were in the eastern part of the state about 2 to 4 inches in deficit, so some of this made up the long-standing deficit on the year so far. The Appalachian Mountains, though, have had very little snow compared to average this year, with many locations between 10 and 20 inches in deficit, especially those higher peaks. Much of the Ohio Valley, the mid-Atlantic, getting out of the coastal plain, has not seen the below average temperatures needed to get some good snow in. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about the flood problems that are in the north central part of the United States again. I also want you to remember that through much of the Rocky Mountains, well above average snowpack, that's going to be important for our spring forecast. And one last thing to leave you off with on this map, if you come over here to the Sierra Nevadas, there are some of the highest peaks in that mountain range missing 150 to 180 inches of snow. So they are in major snow deficit. And the question is, the pattern that got us into this, is it going to persist? Now, over the weekend, a little cutoff low moved through California, moved into parts of Nevada, Arizona, and is currently sitting early this morning, putting down rainfall right here in the central part of the United States. It's going to team up with an upper level low that's come right here into the north central plains later today, and the two of these things are going to make for a soggy start to the week in North Carolina. But here's what those waves currently look like. The lead wave here, that's the one that went through California, and the one behind it right there that came from the northwest. You see, these two waves initially are not working well with one another. In other words, we're going to get two waves of precipitation out of this as it sweeps through the midsection of the country. You can already see both of those circulations separated at the surface. There's one leading low here, which is going to be our main rain producer this week, and the second one is sitting here, which is going to be the kicker on the backside that brings in some colder air. So we need to see how these two systems kind of try to phase together and move across the country. First thing I want to do is tell you this. Right now, when looking at our all hazards weather map, while we don't see too much action in the eastern part of the country, this could be producing a major travel headache for many of us across the United States. And that's because the Winter Storm Severity Index put out by NOAA has, well, Chicago O'Hare's airport in its major impacts region. So we need to watch this area very carefully, because just thinking about flights this time of year, we know that if Chicago's shut down, that tends to impact the rest of the country. Now, how much snow are we talking about there? Well, possibly picking up a pretty good swath in here of about 4 inches. And according to the National Digital Forecast Database, we could possibly pick up quite a bit more inside this region. This is an extremely challenging forecast, though, given the temperatures initially going to be hovering right around 0, making the 10-to-1 ratio not a good ratio. And the model trends have been taking this snow swath further to the south and east and lowering its amounts as of late. Still going to be impactful around Chicago, which is why I brought this up. But let's look at this in the bigger context of things. Adding snow into this area plus the fact that currently the snow water equivalent inside here is on average about 2 inches of liquid equivalent, means that we're going to be dealing with quite a bit of spring flooding on our major river systems. We're adding the rain, or already have added the rain early here this morning. It's spreading in here into the Tennessee Valley throughout the day today, and then eventually down here into the southeast throughout the middle of this week. And even though you see drier conditions in parts of the Great Lakes states, snow here on the backside, well, we're still dealing with the fact that underneath all of that, we've got anywhere between an excess of 2 to 6 inches of surplus water. The whole of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio watershed, Ohio River Valley watershed here, is dealing with an excess of water. And that water has got to drain out before we can have some successful farming operations this spring in that part of the country. Meanwhile, just look at this. Look how dry California has been as the flow in the upper levels of the atmosphere has really largely avoided it. So we just look through the end of this upcoming weekend about how much precipitation we're expecting in North Carolina. Generally 1/2 of an inch, to some locations over 3/4 of an inch, approaching an inch of rainfall. The amounts are going to be tricky to pin down given the difficulties forecasting this next system. But I do know this. We have seen over the last 2 months, the state of North Carolina has averaged between 125 and 225% of normal on precipitation. So you can see where it has been dry. You can see how the split flow has come together here and created system after system that's been running across the country just like that. We need to talk about if that is going to change anytime soon. So let's get right into our European model and see how this all evolves. Let's pause it right here and step you back through the next 48 hours. The low pressure system moves toward Missouri by middle of the afternoon today. That means widespread showers move across North Carolina starting this afternoon. They last into the evening tonight and into early Tuesday morning. Now the first wave, which is here, is sitting over Kentucky, and that one by Tuesday afternoon and evening pushes toward the north and east. Therefore, we may get a little bit of a break Tuesday evening into Wednesday morning from the precipitation. But the second wave comes back in and starts to put snow down in the Midwest, and as that system pulls through, we can see that again on Wednesday night into Thursday morning, another round of potentially getting some rainfall. It'll be quite windy on the backside of this, and we could get some snow on the west-facing slopes of the Appalachian Mountains, so don't be surprised of that on Thursday morning. And after that system moves through, well, this is now showing up Friday morning, Friday afternoon, and evening. There's a second little shortwave that runs around the bigger one here, maybe giving us some more snow in the Appalachian Mountains Friday night to Saturday morning, but we're going to try to finish the week throughout much of North Carolina drier than, of course, the beginning of it was. Getting through the weekend, things are relatively dry, and even into early next week, we stay dry. But by the time I get to Tuesday morning, I'm watching another large low-pressure system midsection of the country that could soak the Carolinas as we work our way into middle of next week. To understand what's going on there, just take a look at this map. This is valid on Monday, March the 2nd. You see, the main story this winter is that our coldest air has been tucked away in these deep troughs in the North Atlantic and in the Arctic. This will be the trough that snuck through at the end of this week, giving us the cool down we're going to experience through the end of this week. But here's the second trough that's extending from it that's going to make middle of next week quite stormy for the midsection of the country. To be honest, the thing you got to watch is this right here. You see, we're seeing that in time, that ridge is going to be moving back to the west. Now, what does that mean? That means our two main troughs are still in place, but the deeper trough that extends in the lower 48 is going to extend west with it. That will allow the subtropical ridge sitting over parts of Cuba, Florida, to regain some strength, moderating temperatures across the eastern part of the country. But unfortunately, with the trough to the west, this flow pattern, again, remember it's doing something like this, tends to be one that excites weather systems in the midsection of the country that move east. So this is not necessarily a pattern that calms down as we look out from March 2nd to March 9th, or week 2. You can now see that the European ensemble is picking up on a wetter than average pattern because of what I just showed you in that previous upper level flow map. All right? From there, what about getting out past March 7th? We continue to see our ridge retrograding. We see that the trough axis extends all the way out here into the Pacific, and ridging starts to rebound here in the midsection of the country. That's going to do a lot to relax our temperature patterns, which is what I want to talk with you about next. So Monday's high temperatures, 60s along the coast, fading back here into the 40s into the Appalachian Mountains. Pressing in on Tuesday, out ahead of that system, that's the warm-up. So widespread 60s across much of the state of North Carolina with some 70s in South Carolina. Wednesday, high temperatures already starting to cool off as the main colder air starts to come in on the back side of this, but still a lot of 60s here. But then watch how our week finishes. This is now Thursday, 40s and 50s. Friday, again, 40s and 50s. Saturday, much of the same, 40s and 50s, and that includes Sunday as well. The moderation begins next week, next Monday, Tuesday. So we start off the week warm and finish it on a cooler note here. So if we look at it all put together, you're saying, well, why does it show up that North Carolina has a warm bias? Well, because you're going to spend the first 2.5 days of this week with well above average temperatures and only the last 2 to 3 days with below average temperatures. All right. As we get out to day 5 through 10, that's where that broader trough is still hanging around, keeping things cooler into next week as well, even though you get a brief warm up out of the system coming in on Monday and Tuesday. But notice this, as you get out to days 10 through 15, this is when we have the pattern doing something a bit more like that. And that ridge that's sitting down here are going to be allowing for near average, warm with average conditions moving into March. Now, as we think about these temperatures, we remember back a few years ago to that mid-March massive cold air outbreak that also happened during a spring that was very early compared to normal. Well, that was associated with a pretty substantial disruption of the polar vortex. And right now, our polar vortex is quite strong and rather undisrupted. It's been that way since the start of the new year, with the Arctic Oscillation spending so much time here above zero. We're running out of time where a change in our zonal wind flow pattern, which is how we describe the polar vortex, for it to come down off of its peaks here. It's currently sitting right here, one of the strongest we've seen in record, and a disruption might just, even if it happens, might not be able to disrupt our temperatures. We're just too far into the season for that to occur. This tells me that the probability of having an extreme cold air outbreak as we move through the month of March, which could be devastating to our crops, the probability of that happening is very low. So let's add to this then our new outlook for the month of March. Remember I told you to look at that snowpack out in the west? Well, we see possibly some sensible cooling out there. And with the ridge retreating, the flow of the jet stream may be doing something a bit more like that. Now, while that prevents the bitterly cold air from sticking around over the southeast and over the Carolinas, what it does do is a jet stream pattern that looks like this excites a lot of low pressure systems in this section of the country, and we've now seen 5 straight model forecasts for the month of March showing up with weather than average conditions in the Mid-South and the Mid-Atlantic, and that most certainly includes the Carolinas. So we've got to watch that very carefully. Quick snapshot of some other global places. In Europe, we're expecting the next 10 days to feature wetter than average conditions across much of northern and central and western Europe. When you look at the temperature patterns, though, in and around the Black Sea, which includes Ukraine, Turkey, the Russian Wheat Belt, Kazakhstan, Caspian Sea, all of that region continues on its very, very warm finish to winter. And it's been very warm there for a while. What are the tropics doing? Well, we've seen in the tropics the Mid-Julian Oscillation really hang out much of winter over here in phase 4, 5, and 6. It then came over here into 7, but rebounded right back into this area. Since then, it's shot back over to here. And we were thinking it might come out into phase 8, 1, and 2, which could give us a cooler flavor to the weather over the coming days and weeks. But instead, it looks as though it's going to retreat right back over into phase 4 and 5, which will be supportive for the more relaxed pattern in terms of temperatures as we get ourselves into March. But this is another interesting thing that the MJO is doing. You see, this is the way we like to view it from the top down. So this is increasing time here, and you can see the map over which this is laid. Now, do you see these warm colors in through there? That represents sinking motion in the atmosphere. And I'm most concerned about this, because that will line itself up with the western side of South America. And as you look over here at the map on the right first, we see that for the next 10 days, the driest axis is right in through here. That hits Argentina's main growing district, which right now has a crop that is trying to finish under very dry conditions is going to be problematic. We're actively harvesting a crop in Mato Grosso. where we need to get soybeans out so that corn and cotton can get planted as fast as possible. Now remember, if they don't get that soybean harvest completed, of which they're right now probably sitting at about 70%, maybe a little bit more, if they don't get that completed by the end of this week, well, planting a corn or cotton crop in March jeopardizes the quality of that crop, given that the monsoonal moisture tends to run out by the end of March and the beginning of April. So this is quite critical. Very wet conditions in through here now could help delay that. Now, just want to point something out. A lot of times we don't fully understand how big these growing areas are in South America, so I decided just to overlay North Carolina inside of Mato Grosso. And just so you know, Mato Grosso is better than 6 times the land area of North Carolina. So these are some huge growing areas in Brazil we're talking about here. To finish this up, I just want to complete a bit of a story here that we started way back in August. Remember discussing the Indian Ocean dipole, how it reached this massive peak at the end of 2019, where the circulation in the atmosphere was causing sinking air and drought over Australia and rising air and flooding over Africa? Well, there's no doubt you've heard a lot recently about the locust problem that has been happening in Africa. I just want to show you what some of this looks like right now. These locusts came into very favorable breeding grounds with all of the heavy rainfall. And as a result, the biggest storms we've seen around the world have been primarily confined to Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya, where they currently are. Now, the map is from the Washington Post, but the data is from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. And what was interesting was that earlier today we saw some reports in Saudi Arabia of a desert locust problem. We got to watch this carefully. A lot of other places in Asia are worried about this. In fact, I heard a news story this morning that China just released an army of ducks that apparently are trained to eat all the locusts. Now, I don't know what that was about, but I thought you might find it interesting to say the least. Let's keep an eye on this to see if this spreads and becomes a bigger problem, because right now it is a huge one for Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, and South Sudan and Sudan. So we've got an area to watch around the world that's dealing with a non-meteorological problem that was caused by a meteorological event. So something interesting to think about. Hope you all have a great week. I'll talk to you again next Monday. Thank you.